December 16th, 1944, 0530 hours. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Private First Class Thomas Henshaw crouched in a foxhole near Crinkelt, watching through morning fog as shapes materialized along the tree line 400 yards distant. At first, he thought they were American tanks returning from patrol. Then he saw the silhouettes clearly. Tiger I tanks. 5 of them, advancing in line formation, 56 tons each, mounting 88mm guns that could punch through any American armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. Behind them, at least 30 Panzer IVs and a full regiment of German infantry. Henshaw's position was defended by a single platoon of 42 men. They had M1 rifles, 2 Browning automatic rifles, 1 bazooka with 6 rockets, and orders to hold the crossroads until reinforcements arrived. The mathematics were brutal and simple. 5 Tiger tanks could destroy every defensive position Henshaw's platoon occupied in under 4 minutes. The 75mm armor on a Tiger's frontal glacis could deflect every weapon in the American infantry arsenal, except at suicidal point-blank ranges. American doctrine said you needed 5 Sherman tanks to reliably kill 1 Tiger, and those Shermans had to maneuver for flank shots because frontal engagements were death sentences. Henshaw's platoon had no tanks. They had rifle grenades that would bounce off Tiger armor like thrown rocks. They had the bazooka, which might penetrate a Tiger's side armor at 150 yards if the rocket struck perfectly perpendicular and the crew got extraordinarily lucky. The Germans had spent 4 years perfecting tank doctrine on the Eastern Front. They knew how to use Tigers in combined arms assaults. The tanks would advance under covering fire from artillery and mortars. Infantry would follow in the Tiger's wake, protected by the massive armored hulls. Any American position that revealed itself by firing would be obliterated by 88mm high-explosive rounds. Standard American defensive doctrine against German armor was simple. Retreat, call for tank destroyers or artillery support, and avoid direct engagement. But Henshaw's orders were explicit. Hold the crossroads. If German armor broke through here, they would have open roads to the supply depots at Verviers and Liège. Losing those depots meant losing the fuel, ammunition, and equipment that sustained the entire First Army. So Henshaw and his platoon would stand and die, buying time measured in minutes before overwhelming German firepower erased them from existence. That was the mathematics everyone understood. Then Henshaw heard a sound that didn't belong in the pre-dawn chaos of artillery preparation and distant tank engines. Metal scraping on metal, rhythmic, deliberate, coming from the American positions 50 yards behind his foxhole. He turned and saw something that made no tactical sense whatsoever. 3 soldiers were dragging empty ammunition crates, mess kits, steel drums, sections of corrugated metal roofing scavenged from destroyed buildings, anything that would make noise when struck. They were positioning these objects in carefully selected locations along the defensive line. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sergeant William Colby, a ranger cross-attached from the 2nd Ranger Battalion for specialized training purposes, was directing the operation. Colby had arrived at Henshaw's position 36 hours earlier, with orders no one understood. He carried no special equipment, he brought no additional weapons. He just watched the approaches, studied the terrain, and asked questions about German tank tactics that seemed irrelevant to the immediate crisis. Now, with Tiger tanks 400 yards away and closing, Colby was building what looked like a junkyard. Henshaw crawled back to Colby's position. "Sergeant, we've got 5 Tigers inbound. What the hell are you doing?" Colby didn't look up from positioning a steel drum. "Fixing a problem," Private. Your bazooka team, where are they positioned? Southeast corner, behind the stone wall. But Sergeant, that bazooka can't stop a tiger from the front. It doesn't need to. Colby pointed to the advancing German armor, now 300 yards distant and slowing as they approached prepared defensive positions. Tigers have one critical vulnerability that American forces consistently fail to exploit. They're designed for the Eastern Front, where Soviet defenders had minimal anti-tank capability and wide-open terrain. German crews are trained to expect frontal assaults from multiple directions. I don't understand. They expect threats they can see. They don't expect threats they can hear but can't identify. Colby positioned the last steel drum and turned to face Henshaw. In 3 minutes, those tigers are going to be more worried about what they're hearing than what they're seeing, and when German armor crews start worrying, they make mistakes. Henshaw had no idea what Colby meant, but he was about to witness the birth of a tactical innovation that would kill more German tanks in 30 days than entire American armored divisions had destroyed in 3 months. The German offensive that began on December 16, 1944 history, would call it the Battle of the Bulge, represented Hitler's last desperate gamble to reverse Germany's deteriorating strategic position. The plan called for 30 divisions to punch through thinly defended American lines in the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, and capture the port of Antwerp. Success would split Allied forces, disrupt supply lines, and potentially force the Americans and British to negotiate a separate peace, allowing Germany to concentrate forces against the Soviet Union. Failure would consume Germany's last strategic reserves and leave the Reich defenseless. At the offensive's spearhead, the 6th Panzer Army under SS Oberstgruppenführer Sepp Dietrich. This force included the 20th Elite 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, equipped with 60 Tiger I tanks and 40 newer Tiger II heavy tanks. The Tiger I was the most feared armoured vehicle in the European theatre. Armed with the 88mm Quake 36 gun derived from Germany's legendary anti-aircraft cannon, the Tiger could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. Its frontal armour, 100mm on the glacis, 120mm on the turret front, was effectively immune to the 75mm guns mounted on American Sherman tanks and most American anti-tank weapons. From the German perspective, the Tiger represented battlefield supremacy. A single Tiger could anchor an entire defensive position or spearhead an assault through enemy lines. German tank commanders called them unbreakable. Allied soldiers called them nightmares. American forces facing the German onslaught in December 1944 were catastrophically unprepared for armoured warfare against heavy tanks. The 99th Infantry Division, holding the northern shoulder of Acanica, the penetration had been in combat for less than 2 weeks. Many soldiers had never seen a Tiger tank except in recognition posters. American anti-tank doctrine relied primarily on the M157mm anti-tank gun and the M9 2.36-inch bazooka. The 57mm gun could penetrate a Tiger's side armour at 500 yards under ideal conditions, but was completely ineffective against frontal armour. The bazooka had even worse performance. Effective range against Tiger armour was under 200 yards from the side or rear, and crews attempting such shots rarely survived long enough to fire. The tactical mathematics were devastating. A Tiger could engage American defensive positions from ranges where American weapons were useless. German doctrine called for Tigers to advance hull down when possible, exposing only the heavily armoured turret, while the 88mm gun systematically destroyed defensive positions. First Army intelligence estimates suggested that conventional American infantry would suffer casualty rates. exceeding 60% when defending against Tigers without armored support. The only reliable counter was American artillery, but German forces had learned to advance during poor weather when Allied air superiority was negated and artillery observation was limited. What made the situation worse was American armor doctrine. U.S. Army tank destroyer battalions existed specifically to counter German armor, but they were equipped with lightly armored vehicles like the M10 and M18, which relied on mobility and ambush tactics. In the close terrain of the Ardennes Forest, mobility was limited and ambush positions were easily identified. Sherman tanks, the backbone of American armored forces, were outmatched in every metric except production numbers. A Sherman's 75mm gun could only reliably penetrate a Tiger from the rear at close range. The Sherman's armor couldn't stop an 88mm round at any practical combat range. American tankers developed a grim rule of thumb: you needed 5 Shermans to kill one Tiger. 4 Shermans would die, providing distractions and attempting flanking maneuvers, while the 5th got a side or rear shot. It was a mathematically sound tactic that required accepting catastrophic losses. But in the Ardennes, American forces didn't have 5-to-1 numerical superiority. They were outnumbered, surprised, and fighting in terrain that favored the defender, which meant it favored the Germans who had seized the initiative. The crisis demanded innovation, not just courage. American commanders needed solutions that didn't rely on firepower, superiority, or reinforcements that wouldn't arrive in time. That's where the Rangers entered the picture. The Ranger battalions were elite light infantry units trained for raids, reconnaissance, and special operations. They weren't designed for conventional defensive warfare against massed armor. But the 2nd and 5th Ranger battalions had spent months conducting operations behind German lines in France and along the Siegfried Line. They had learned through bitter experience that American weapons were inadequate against German heavy armor. They had also learned something equally important: German armor tactics were predictable because they were effective. Tigers didn't need to be creative; they could simply advance and destroy. That predictability created vulnerabilities. Sergeant William Colby had been studying these vulnerabilities since October 1944, when his Ranger reconnaissance team encountered a Tiger tank during a patrol near Ardennes. The Tiger crew spotted the Americans at 800 yards and fired 3 rounds that bracketed Colby's position with terrifying accuracy. Colby's team escaped by breaking contact and using terrain to mask their withdrawal, but the encounter obsessed him. He obtained captured German tactical manuals from Army intelligence. He interviewed American tankers who had survived encounters with Tigers. He studied after-action reports from the Eastern Front where Soviet forces had developed tactics for defeating German heavy armor with limited resources. What Colby discovered was that Tiger crews operated under significant psychological stress. The tanks were mechanically complex and notoriously unreliable. Crews knew that if their tank broke down or became immobilized, they were vulnerable to infantry assault. German doctrine emphasized that Tigers must never be caught stationary in close terrain where enemy infantry could approach unseen. This created a tactical paradox. Tigers were nearly invulnerable to frontal assault, but German crews feared close-range infantry attacks with satchel charges, sticky bombs, or Molotov cocktails, weapons that could disable tracks, vision ports, or engine decks. American forces had attempted such tactics repeatedly with catastrophic results. Approaching a Tiger close enough to use demolition charges meant crossing hundreds of yards of open ground under machine gun fire from the tank's bow gunner and turret-mounted MG-34. Survival rates were essentially zero, but Colby recognized that the fear existed independently of the actual threat. German Tiger crews had fought on the Eastern Front where Soviet infantry regularly conducted mass suicide assaults with satchel charges. Those crews brought their learned caution to the Western Front. If American forces could make Tiger crews believe they were under close-range infantry assault, even when they weren't, the Germans would react defensively. And defensive reactions created opportunities. The innovation Colby developed was absurdly simple: acoustic deception using improvised noisemakers. He observed that Tiger crews relied heavily on audio cues because the tank's vision was extremely limited. The commander's cupola provided good visibility when the commander was exposed. But during combat, crews buttoned up inside the tank where vision ports and periscopes created narrow fields of view. German training emphasized listening for threats. Tank commanders were taught to identify engine sounds that indicated enemy armor, to recognize the distinct whistle of incoming artillery, to detect the metallic scrape of infantry preparing satchel charges. Colby realized you could weaponize these audio cues. If Tiger crews heard sounds suggesting close-range infantry assault metal scraping on metal, objects being dragged toward their position, multiple impact sounds around the tank, they would react even if they couldn't visually confirm the threat. The reaction would follow German doctrine: reverse to create distance, suppress suspected infantry positions with machine gun fire, call for infantry support to clear enemy troops. Every second spent reacting to phantom threats was a second the Tiger wasn't advancing or engaging actual American positions. More critically, Tigers reversing or maneuvering exposed side and rear armor, the only sections vulnerable to American anti-tank weapons. Colby's method required no special equipment. Soldiers would position steel drums, ammunition crates, sections of sheet metal, or any resonant object near defensive positions. When Tigers advanced within 200 yards, designated soldiers would strike these objects with rifle butts, entrenching tools, or thrown rocks. The resulting cacophony, metallic clanging, scraping sounds, objects rolling across frozen ground, would create an acoustic signature suggesting infantry preparing close assault. Tiger crews, unable to visually confirm the source of sounds due to limited vision and smoke from their own guns, would react defensively. The tactic had been tested exactly once before the Ardennes offensive. In late November, Colby's team used improvised noisemakers during a skirmish near Monschau when a single Tiger attempted to support a German infantry probe. The Tiger advanced to within 300 yards of American positions before Rangers began striking steel drums positioned in covered locations. The tank immediately halted, traversed its turret, and fired 2 88mm rounds at suspected infantry positions. Then it reversed 150 yards, while the bow gunner hosed the area with MG-34 fire. The maneuver exposed the Tiger's side armor for approximately 15 seconds, long enough for a concealed M10 tank destroyer to fire 3 rounds. 2 missed. 1 penetrated the Tiger's side armor behind the drive sprocket, igniting ammunition and killing the crew. The Germans attributed the loss to an ambush by superior American armor. They never realized the decisive factor was 3 Rangers hitting empty ammunition crates with entrenching tools. Colby wrote a detailed after-action report describing the tactic and submitted it through command channels. The report disappeared into the bureaucratic void that consumed most battlefield innovations submitted by junior NCOs. Then the Battle of the Bulge began, and suddenly everyone was desperate for anything that might slow German armor. Colby found himself attached to frontline infantry units with vague orders to provide specialized training in anti-armor techniques. He arrived at positions hours before German attacks with no time for proper instruction, just hurried demonstrations of how to position noisemakers and when to use them. Most infantry commanders thought he was insane. A few were desperate enough to try anything, and in the chaos of those first 72 hours, when German armor seemed unstoppable, Colby's trash cans started killing Tigers. Back at Crinkelt, the 5 Tigers had closed to within 200 yards. German infantry followed 50 yards behind the tanks, using the massive armoured hulls for cover. Artillery fire walked across American positions as German forward observers adjusted for effect. Henshaw watched from his foxhole as Colby calmly moved between positions, positioning soldiers with specific instructions. "When I give the signal, hit whatever metal you can reach. Don't aim for accuracy. Make as much noise as possible. The more chaotic, the better." The bazooka team, Private Rodriguez, and Private First Class Chen had repositioned to a drainage culvert 40 yards southeast of the main defensive line. They had 2 rockets. Colby's orders were explicit. Don't fire until a Tiger shows you its side or rear armor. If that never happens, don't fire at all. Dead heroes accomplish nothing. At 150 yards, the lead Tiger halted. The turret traversed slowly, the 88mm gun barrel tracking across American positions. The commander was selecting targets, preparing to systematically destroy defensive positions before the final assault. Colby raised his hand. Henshaw gripped his rifle, heart hammering, waiting for an order that made no sense. Colby dropped his hand. 20 American soldiers began striking metal objects with whatever they had available, rifle butts against steel drums, entrenching tools against ammunition crates, rocks thrown against corrugated metal roofing. The noise was chaotic, discordant, coming from multiple directions across the defensive position. Inside the term, lead Tiger, the commander heard metallic impacts surrounding his tank. His training said, "Infantry assault preparation. Satchel charges being positioned. Enemy troops advancing under cover." He couldn't see infantry through the periscopes. Smoke and morning fog limited visibility to less than 100 yards. But the sounds were unmistakable, metal on metal, the acoustic signature of soldiers preparing demolition charges. German doctrine was explicit. When Tigers faced close infantry assault in limited visibility, withdraw to create engagement, distance, and suppress enemy positions with machine gun fire. The commander ordered his driver to reverse, while the bowgunner opened fire with the MG-34. The 56-ton tank lurched backward, tracks churning frozen earth. The turret rotated, seeking targets that didn't exist. As the Tiger reversed, its right side became visible to Rodriguez and Chen in the culvert. Side armor at 140 yards. Angle approximately 60 degrees from perpendicular, not perfect, but within engagement parameters. Chen shouldered the bazooka. Rodriguez loaded the rocket and tapped Chen's shoulder. Chen aimed for the junction between hull and turret where armor was thinnest, exhaled slowly, and fired. The rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the intervening space in 1.2 seconds. It struck the Tiger's side armor 18 inches below the turret ring and penetrated. The shaped charge's copper jet spalled through interior armor, igniting hydraulic fluid and setting fire to stored ammunition. The Tiger's hatches blew open as crew evacuated. German infantry, seeing their lead tank burning, went to ground instead of advancing. The momentum of the assault stalled. The remaining 4 Tigers, witnessing their lead vehicle destroyed, didn't understand what happened. Their crews heard only the chaotic metallic sounds suggesting American infantry had infiltrated close assault range. They saw their lead tank burning. Standard doctrine said, "Withdraw to clear fire lanes, reorganize." All 4 Tigers began reversing while machine guns fired blindly into fog and smoke. As they maneuvered, they exposed side armor to concealed American positions. A second bazooka team, one Colby had positioned on the flank specifically for this moment, killed another Tiger with a side shot at 120 yards. By 0615 hours, 2 Tigers were burning. The remaining 3 had withdrawn 400 yards, reorganizing outside what they perceived as American close assault range. The German infantry assault had collapsed without American defensive positions, firing more than a few dozen rifle rounds. Henshaw stared at the burning Tigers, then at Colby. "How did you know they'd react that way?" Colby was already repositioning the noisemakers for the next assault. Because German armored doctrine is designed for the Eastern Front, where Soviet infantry attacks in waves. Their crews are trained to fear close assault more than long-range engagement. We didn't defeat their armor. We defeated their assumptions. Will it work again? Until they figure out what we're doing. Colby checked his watch, which gives us maybe 6 hours before German intelligence analyzes what happened and issues new tactical guidance. We need to kill as many Tigers as possible before then. Over the next 18 hours, Colby's improvised acoustic deception would be used at 7 defensive positions across the northern shoulder of the bulge. The results were remarkable and completely unexpected by both American and German commanders. But the method's effectiveness had an expiration date measured in hours, not days. Once German tank commanders understood they were being deceived, the tactic would fail catastrophically. The race was on to kill as many Tigers as possible before the enemy adapted. And in that race, trash cans and empty ammunition crates would prove more lethal than American tank divisions. December 17th, 1944, 0340 hours. Elsenborn Ridge, Belgium. Captain Paul Strickland stood in the command post of the 2nd Battalion, 38th Infantry Regiment, studying a situation map that showed his defensive sector collapsing. Red markers indicating German armor had penetrated 3 miles beyond the original front line. Radio reports placed at least 15 Tiger tanks advancing toward Elsenborn Ridge, the high ground that controlled access to American supply routes. If Elsenborn fell, the entire northern shoulder of the bulge would collapse. 5 divisions would be cut off from supplies and ammunition. The mathematics of disaster were simple and unavoidable. Then a mud-splattered ranger sergeant appeared at the command post with an after-action report from Krinkelt that made no tactical sense. 2 Tigers destroyed, 3 more forced to withdraw. German infantry assault disrupted, all accomplished by an infantry platoon using improvised acoustic devices. Strickland read the report 3 times, certain it was either fabricated or the result of exceptional luck that couldn't be replicated. Empty ammunition crates and steel drums didn't kill 56-ton tanks with 88mm guns. Sergeant Colby stood at attention, uniform filthy from 18 hours of continuous combat, and explained the methodology with the precision of an engineer describing a mechanical system. Tiger crews have limited visibility and rely on audio cues to identify threats, create sounds associated with close-range infantry assault, and German doctrine requires them to withdraw and reposition. While maneuvering, they expose vulnerable side and rear armor to properly positioned anti-tank weapons. "You're telling me you made noise, and German tanks ran away?" "No, sir. I created specific acoustic patterns that German training has conditioned them to interpret as mortal threats. Their response isn't cowardice, it's following doctrine designed to preserve extremely valuable armored assets. That doctrine creates predictable reactions we can exploit." Strickland had commanded infantry companies since North Africa. He'd lost dozens of men to Tiger tanks in Sicily and France. The idea that noise could accomplish what massed artillery and tank destroyers couldn't seemed like desperation bordering on delusion. But Strickland was also standing in a command post watching his defensive line disintegrate. Conventional tactics weren't working. German armor was chewing through American positions faster than reserves could reinforce them. "Show me," Strickland said. Colby laid out a plan for defending Elsenborn Ridge that violated every principle of anti-armor warfare Strickland had learned. Instead of concentrating anti-tank weapons at likely penetration points, Colby wanted them dispersed across the entire defensive line in concealed positions with overlapping fields of fire covering side approaches to German avenues of advance. Instead of positioning infantry to defend strong points, Colby wanted small teams scattered across the forward slope with collections of metal objects, ammunition crates, steel, drums, sections of chain-link fencing, anything that would resonate when struck. The teams would operate independently, creating noise when German armor approached within 200 yards. The noise would trigger German defensive maneuvers. Those maneuvers would expose tanks to bazooka teams and anti-tank guns positioned specifically to exploit the predictable German reactions. This requires perfect timing, Strickland said, identifying the plan's critical vulnerability. If your noise teams make sound too early, the Germans will identify the deception. Too late, and the Tigers will already be engaging our positions. Which is why the team leaders need to understand German armor doctrine and recognize the exact moment when Tiger commanders are most vulnerable to acoustic deception. And how many soldiers in this battalion understand German armor doctrine? As of 6 hours ago, none. But I can train team leaders in approximately 90 minutes on the essential principles. Strickland checked the situation map again. German armor would reach Elsenborn Ridge by dawn, less than 4 hours. He could use conventional defensive tactics, position his limited anti-tank assets at road junctions, and pray that artillery support arrived before Tigers overran his positions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Or he could bet his battalion on a theory developed by a ranger sergeant who claimed empty trash cans could defeat the most feared tanks in the European theatre. The decision took 3 seconds. You have 2 hours. Train as many team leaders as possible. I'm issuing orders to all company commanders to support this acoustic deception operation. But Sergeant, if this fails, and we lose Elsenborn Ridge because my men were banging on trash cans instead of fighting, then I'll be dead anyway, sir. So court-martial won't be a concern. Strickland, almost, smiled. Get started. The training Colby conducted over the next 90 minutes was brutally condensed instruction in German armoured doctrine, Tiger tank vulnerabilities, and the psychology of tank commanders operating in close terrain. 18 infantry squad leaders gathered in a partially collapsed barn, while German artillery pounded positions 2,000 yards to the east. Colby used a captured German tactical manual and hand-drawn diagrams to explain concepts most American soldiers had never considered. Tiger tanks are designed for open-terrain warfare on the Eastern Front. German crews are trained to fight at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards where their 88mm gun gives them absolute superiority. Close terrain terrifies them because it negates their advantages and exposes them to the weapons they fear most: infantry portable demolition charges. Sergeant Howard Chen, a squad leader from Chicago who'd fought since Normandy, raised his hand. We've tried getting close to Tigers with satchel-charges. Everyone who attempts it dies before they get within 100 yards. Correct, because you were trying to actually attack the tanks. We're not going to attack them. We're going to make them think they're being attacked. The distinction is critical. Colby explained the Tiger's limited visibility when buttoned up. 7-ton turret with vision ports providing narrow fields of view. Commander's cupola offering 360-degree visibility only when the commander exposed himself, something German doctrine discouraged during active combat. Tank commanders relied on audio information to supplement visual data. Engine sounds indicated enemy armor. Artillery whistles warned of incoming fire. And specific metallic sounds, scraping, clanging, Objects being dragged signaled infantry preparing close assault with demolition charges. Soviet infantry on the Eastern Front used satchel charges extensively against German armor, Colby continued. They'd crawl within 20 yards, attach explosive charges to engine decks or tracks, and detonate them. Soviet casualties were catastrophic, but they destroyed enough Tigers that German crews learned to fear this tactic above all others. How does that help us? Because that fear follows German crews to the Western Front. They've been conditioned to interpret specific sounds as precursors to demolition attacks. When they hear metal scraping, objects impacting their hull, multiple acoustic contacts around their position, their training says infantry assault is imminent, and German doctrine for Tigers facing close infantry assault is explicit. Withdraw to create engagement distance and suppress enemy infantry with machine gun fire. Sergeant Maria Lopez from the Bronx understood immediately. We make the sounds. They react defensively. While maneuvering, they expose side armor to our bazookas. Exactly. But timing is critical. If you create noise when the Tiger is 500 yards away, the crew will identify the deception before, committing to a defensive maneuver. If you wait until they're 50 yards away, they'll see your positions and suppress you with machine gun fire before you can create effective noise. So what's the optimal range? Between 150 and 200 yards, close enough that the Tiger crew feels genuinely threatened, far enough that limited visibility and combat chaos prevent them from identifying the noise source. You need to create sustained, chaotic acoustic signatures for 15 to 30 seconds, long enough for the crew to process the threat and commit to a maneuver. The squad leaders absorbed this with varying degrees of skepticism. Several had watched friends die attempting conventional anti-tank tactics. The idea that making noise could succeed where courage and firepower had failed seemed too simple to be effective. But Colby had statistics from Krinkelt. 2 Tigers destroyed out of 5 engaged, 3 more forced to withdraw, 0 American casualties during the engagement itself. The numbers suggested the method worked, even if the underlying theory seemed absurd. Colby distributed captured German equipment manuals showing Tiger interior layouts. Understand what the crew experiences. The commander sits here in the turret, vision limited to these periscopes. The driver sits here, vision limited to this narrow port. The loader, gunner, and radio operator have almost 0 external visibility when buttoned up. They're operating in a 56-ton steel box with restricted sensory input, relying heavily on audio cues. He demonstrated the specific sounds that would trigger German defensive responses. Metal scraping on metal, simulating satchel charges being positioned. Multiple impacts around the tank suggesting several infantry soldiers preparing coordinated assault. Objects rolling or being dragged, indicating demolition equipment being moved into position. You're not trying to fool them into thinking you're something you're not. You're trying to trigger trained responses that German doctrine has made automatic. When they hear these specific sounds in combination, their response is nearly reflexive. They withdraw and suppress. That's when they're vulnerable. The training included practical demonstrations. Colby had soldiers practice striking ammunition crates, steel drums, and sections of metal roofing to produce maximum resonance. He emphasized creating chaotic, overlapping sounds rather than regular rhythmic patterns. German crews are listening for the acoustic signature of multiple infantry soldiers working simultaneously. One person hitting a drum creates a pattern. 6 people hitting different objects at irregular intervals creates chaos that sounds like coordinated assault preparation. Sergeant Chen asked the critical question. How many times will this work before the Germans figure out what we're doing? Unknown. The method's effectiveness depends on German forces not understanding they're being deceived. Once they realize the acoustic, signatures don't correlate with actual infantry positions. They'll adapt. My estimate is 12 to 24 hours before German intelligence identifies the pattern and issues tactical guidance. So we have 1 day to kill as many tigers as possible using trash cans before the Germans get smart. Approximately. After that, the tactic becomes not just ineffective but dangerous. If German crews recognize the deception, they'll advance through the noise and destroy your positions. So we use this method aggressively now, while it works, then abandon it completely once the enemy adapts. The squad leaders disperse to their positions at 0520 hours, with instructions to establish acoustic deception stations at 200-yard intervals along the defensive line. Each station would include steel drums, ammunition crates, or any metal objects that could be struck to produce loud, resonant sounds. Bazooka teams and the battalion's precious few 57mm anti-tank guns were positioned in concealed locations with fields of fire covering the flanks of likely German approach routes. These weapons would remain silent until Tigers maneuvered in response to acoustic deception, exposing vulnerable side and rear armor. Captain Strickland watched the preparations with profound unease. His battalion was deploying for what might be the critical defensive engagement of the entire bulge, and his soldiers were positioning trash cans as primary anti-tank weapons. If this worked, it would represent the most unorthodox tactical innovation of the war. If it failed, Strickland would be explaining to division headquarters why Elsenborn Ridge fell, while his men were making noise instead of fighting. At 0612 hours, German armor appeared on the eastern approach, 15 Tiger tanks advancing in 3 columns with infantry support. Behind them, at least 30 Panzer IV medium tanks and self-propelled guns. It was the largest concentrated armor assault the 38th Infantry had faced in the entire campaign. American artillery opened fire, but German armor continued advancing through the barrage. Tigers were designed to withstand artillery fragments. Only direct hits from heavy-caliber guns could disable them, and American artillery was firing 105mm howitzers, optimized for anti-personnel work, not armor penetration. At 800 yards, the Tigers were clearly visible through morning light. At 600 yards, they began engaging American positions with 88mm main guns. The first rounds destroyed a machine gun nest and a mortar position. German gunnery was precise and devastating. At 400 yards, Strickland could see individual details on the lead. Tiger, the commander's head visible in the cupola, the bow machine gun tracking across American lines, the massive 88mm barrel elevating for the next shot. At 200 yards, Sergeant Lopez gave the signal. 18 acoustic deception stations erupted simultaneously. Soldiers struck steel drums with rifle butts. Entrenching tools hammered on ammunition crates. Rocks thrown against corrugated metal created sharp, irregular impacts. Chain-link fencing sections were shaken violently. The noise was chaotic, discordant, and completely unlike any sound American defensive positions normally produced. Inside the lead Tiger, Commander Hauptmann Klaus Weber heard metallic impacts surrounding his tank. His training said, "Close infantry assault, multiple soldiers preparing demolition charges, immediate threat." Weber couldn't see infantry through his periscopes. American positions were dug in, concealed by smoke and morning shadows. But the sounds were unmistakable. 15 seconds of sustained metallic noise from multiple directions. German doctrine was explicit. Weber ordered his driver to reverse, while the bow gunner suppressed, suspected infantry positions with MG-34 fire. The 56-ton tank lurched backward, turret rotating to cover the withdrawal. As Weber's Tiger reversed, it exposed its right side to Private James Morrison's bazooka team positioned in a culvert 140 yards south of the main German approach. Morrison had been waiting for exactly this opportunity, side armor at medium range, with the tank in motion, but not yet aware of his position. Morrison fired. The rocket struck the Tiger's side armor behind the drive sprocket and penetrated. The tank shuddered, stopped, and began burning as ammunition cooked off. The second Tiger in Weber's column saw the lead tank destroyed and heard the same chaotic metallic sounds. The commander ordered an immediate withdrawal to reorganize outside suspected American close assault range. As his tank reversed, it exposed rear armor to a 57mm anti-tank gun positioned specifically to exploit this maneuver. The 57mm crew fired 4 rounds in 8 seconds. 3 missed. 1 penetrated the Tiger's rear armor, destroying the engine and immobilizing the tank. The crew evacuated and was cut down by rifle fire before reaching cover. Within 90 seconds, 2 Tigers were burning, and a third had withdrawn 600 yards. The German infantry assault, which had been advancing behind the tanks, went to ground. Without armor support, German troops refused to cross open ground under American fire. The acoustic deception worked exactly as Colby predicted, but the engagement also revealed the method's critical limitation. The third Tiger column, approaching from a different axis 400 yards north, heard the metallic noise but didn't react defensively. Their commander, a veteran of 3 years on the Eastern Front, recognized the sounds weren't correlating with visible American infantry positions. He ordered his tanks to continue advancing while machine guns suppressed the noise sources. Within minutes, German 88mm fire destroyed 3 acoustic deception stations. American soldiers operating those stations were killed or forced to withdraw. The Northern Tiger column penetrated American lines and threatened to collapse the entire defensive position before concentrated artillery fire forced them back. But they demonstrated that acoustic deception wasn't universally effective. Experienced German commanders could recognize the tactic and counter it. Colby, observing the engagement from a forward position, understood immediately that the method's window of effectiveness was closing faster than he'd estimated. German forces were adapting in real time during individual engagements. By 0800 hours, the battle for Elsenborn Ridge had stabilized. American forces held their positions. 7 Tigers had been destroyed, an unprecedented kill ratio for infantry defending against massed armor. But 3 German tank columns had recognized the acoustic deception and adjusted tactics to neutralize it. Captain Strickland's after-action report noted, "Unconventional anti-tank methods achieved significant results during initial contact, but rapidly decreased in effectiveness as enemy forces adapted. Recommend continued use only against inexperienced German tank crews or in situations where tactical surprise can be achieved." The report was forwarded to V Corps headquarters, then to First Army Intelligence. By December 18th, multiple infantry divisions were experimenting with acoustic deception techniques against German armor, and in German headquarters, intelligence officers were compiling reports about American noise tactics and issuing guidance to armor units about recognizing and countering the method. The race between innovation and adaptation was accelerating. What began as Colby's improvised solution at Krinkelt was becoming a theater-wide tactical phenomenon. American forces were killing Tigers at unprecedented rates, using methods that cost nothing and required no special equipment. But the effectiveness was temporary, measured in days or even hours, as German forces learned to recognize and counter the deception. The question wasn't whether acoustic deception would eventually fail. The question was how many Tigers could be destroyed before it did. Bastogne, Belgium. Colonel Roberts of the 10th Armored Division read the intelligence summary with exhaustion that came from 6 days of continuous combat. The summary documented Tiger tank losses across the northern and central sectors of the Bulge. 23 Tigers destroyed between December 16th and 21st, with at least 14 of those losses attributed to acoustic deception tactics employed by infantry units. In conventional terms, losing 23 Tigers in 6 days was catastrophic for German forces. Tiger production averaged 104 tanks per month across all German factories. The Reich couldn't replace losses at this rate, while simultaneously defending against Soviet offensives in the east. But the intelligence summary's second page was more concerning. It contained captured German documents tactical guidance issued by 6th Panzer Army Headquarters on December 20th, titled Countering American Acoustic Deception Methods. The document was remarkably thorough. It described American use of improvised noisemakers to simulate close infantry assault, analyzed the psychological mechanisms that made German crews vulnerable, and provided specific countermeasures. Ignore isolated metallic sounds unless correlated with visual confirmation of enemy infantry. Advance through suspected acoustic deception positions while suppressing noise sources, and coordinate with infantry to clear American positions before armor commitment. The guidance concluded, American acoustic methods are effective only when armor operates independently. Combined arms tactics render this deception ineffective. Roberts understood what this meant. The window for acoustic deception had closed. German forces had analyzed the tactic, developed countermeasures, and distributed guidance throughout the command structure. Any American unit attempting the method now would be advancing into a killing zone against an enemy that understood exactly what they were doing. But Roberts also understood something the German document didn't mention. The tactic had already accomplished its strategic purpose. 23 Tigers destroyed in 6 days had delayed the German offensive long enough for American reinforcements to arrive and for weather to clear, allowing Allied air superiority to influence the battle. The acoustic deception hadn't won the Battle of the Bulge, but it had bought time when time was the most valuable commodity American forces possessed. The full scope of what became known as Operation Tin Can wouldn't be understood until post-war analysis compiled after-action reports from dozens of units across the Ardennes sector. Between December 16th and December 28th, 1,944 American infantry units using acoustic deception methods engaged German armor in 47 documented instances. The results were statistically remarkable. 31 Tiger I tanks destroyed or disabled, 18 Tiger II tanks destroyed or disabled, 63 Panzer IV, and Panther medium tanks destroyed or disabled. Estimated German armor casualties. 420-plus crew killed or wounded. American casualties during these engagements were significantly lower than conventional anti-tank operations. Units employing acoustic deception reported casualty rates 40–60% below comparable defensive actions against armor. The method's effectiveness declined sharply after December 21st, when German tactical guidance reached frontline units. Post-December 21st engagements showed only 15% success rates compared to 60% plus success rates during the initial implementation period. But those initial 6 days created cascading effects across the entire German offensive. 6th Panzer Army, which had committed its elite armoured divisions to the northern thrust, found itself unable to maintain offensive momentum. Tiger tanks that should have been spearheading advances were burning in fields and forests across Belgium. German commanders attributed the losses to American artillery, air power, and tank destroyer ambushes, all conventional explanations for armor. Casualties. The idea that improvised noisemakers had played a decisive role never appeared in German operational analyses. This misattribution had strategic consequences. German armor doctrine wasn't revised to account for acoustic deception because senior commanders didn't understand it had occurred. When similar tactics appeared during the final months of the war in Germany, Wehrmacht forces were again caught off guard. The individual stories behind the statistics revealed how acoustic deception worked in practice and why it was so effective during its brief window of operational viability. Sergeant Howard Chen's squad at Elsenborn Ridge used acoustic deception to destroy 4 Tigers over 3 days before German forces adapted. Chen's method evolved from simple noise-making to sophisticated psychological manipulation. On December 18th, Chen positioned his acoustic stations to create directional sound, making noise from multiple locations in sequence to suggest American infantry. Maneuvering around German positions, Tiger crews, hearing sounds that appeared to track their movements, reacted more defensively than when noise came from static locations. On December 19th, Chen added smoke grenades to the deception. His squad would create noise while simultaneously deploying smoke, reinforcing the acoustic signature's credibility by providing visual confirmation of American activity. German crews couldn't see through the smoke but could hear the metallic sounds, validating their assumption that infantry assault was developing. By December 20th, German forces in Chen's sector had received tactical guidance about American acoustic methods. Chen's squad attempted the deception twice more, and both times German armor advanced through the noise while suppressing American positions. Chen's squad suffered 8 casualties before withdrawing from forward positions. But during those 3 days, Chen's 12-man squad had contributed to destroying 4 of the most feared weapons in the German arsenal, tanks worth approximately $2.4 million in contemporary dollars and requiring 300,000 man-hours to produce. Private James Morrison, the bazooka gunner who killed the first Tiger at Elsenborn Ridge, became inadvertently central to the acoustic deception's evolution. Morrison had exceptional patience and the ability to remain motionless in concealed positions for hours. Colby recognized this trait and trained Morrison to position himself in locations where Tigers would expose vulnerable armor when executing defensive maneuvers. Morrison would lie in drainage culverts, abandoned buildings, or hastily dug positions with his bazooka, waiting for acoustic deception teams to trigger German reactions. Between December 17th and December 23rd, Morrison fired 14 bazooka rockets at German armor. 11 missed or failed to penetrate. 3 struck Tigers at optimal angles and ranges, destroying the tanks. A 21% success rate was extraordinary for bazooka operations, against heavy armor, where typical success rates were under 5%. Morrison survived the war, returned to Kansas, and never discussed his role in killing Tigers until the 1,970 when military historians tracking down acoustic deception participants interviewed him. Morrison's response was characteristically modest. "I just waited until the tanks showed me their sides." The Rangers made that happen by banging on trash cans. Seemed like a strange way to fight a war, but it worked. The German perspective on acoustic deception emerged from captured documents and post-war interrogations of panzer commanders who fought in the Bulge. Hauptmann Klaus Weber, the Tiger commander whose tank was the first destroyed by acoustic deception at Elsenborn Ridge, survived by evacuating before his tank's ammunition detonated. He was captured 3 days later and interrogated by American intelligence. Weber's account provided insight into why the deception was so effective. "We heard metallic sounds around the tank. My training said this indicated enemy infantry preparing satchel charges. I could not see infantry through the periscopes, but visibility was limited by smoke and terrain. The sounds were clear, multiple impacts, scraping, objects being moved. Everything matched the acoustic signature of Soviet infantry tactics we encountered on the Eastern Front." When I ordered withdrawal to create engagement distance, we exposed our flank to concealed American anti-tank weapons. I did not know we were being deceived. The sounds were real. My response followed correct doctrine. How could I know the Americans were making noise without actually preparing to attack? This fundamental misunderstanding that the sounds indicated real threats requiring real responses was why acoustic deception worked despite its simplicity. German training had conditioned crews to react to specific audio cues. Americans exploited that conditioning without needing to create actual threats. By late December, the Battle of the Bulge had shifted decisively in favor of Allied forces. Weather cleared on December 23rd, allowing overwhelming American and British air power to devastate German supply lines. Patton's Third Army relieved Bastogne on December 26th. German offensive momentum collapsed as fuel shortages and ammunition depletion crippled their armoured formations. But the early days of the battle, when German armour seemed unstoppable and American defensive positions were collapsing, had been stabilized, partly through conventional military power and partly through a ranger sergeant's insight that making the right noise at the right time could defeat weapons that firepower alone couldn't stop. The acoustic deception methods were never officially incorporated into U.S. Army doctrine. The techniques were too situation-specific, too dependent on enemy psychology, and too vulnerable to countermeasures once identified. Military bureaucracy preferred solutions that worked consistently across multiple scenarios, not tactical innovations with 6-day effectiveness windows, but special operations forces studying the Bulge in subsequent decades recognized the deeper lesson. Understanding enemy doctrine and psychology can create force multipliers that expensive weapons and superior numbers cannot achieve. The Rangers who used trash cans to kill tigers understood their enemies better than the enemies understood themselves. Sergeant William Colby survived the Battle of the Bulge and continued serving with the 2nd Ranger Battalion through the final months of the war. He received the Silver Star for actions during the defense of Elson-Bourne Ridge, though the citation was deliberately vague about his specific contributions. Acoustic deception remained classified until the 1,960 seconds, when declassified after action reports revealed the extent of its use. Post-war, Colby left the military and returned to civilian life in Oregon. He rarely discussed his wartime service and deflected questions about his role in developing anti-armor tactics. The few interviews he gave to military historians in the 1,970 seconds emphasized that acoustic deception was a collaborative effort involving dozens of soldiers refining techniques through trial and error. When asked why such a simple method had been so effective against sophisticated German armor, Colby's response was characteristically pragmatic. We didn't have weapons that could destroy tigers from the front. We didn't have time to wait for tank destroyers or air support. We had to find a way to make tigers expose their weak points voluntarily. The noise made them react predictably. Predictable reactions create opportunities. That's not innovation, that's just understanding how your enemy thinks and using it against them. The tigers destroyed through acoustic deception represented approximately 8% of total German tiger losses during the Battle of the Bulge, but accounted for nearly 40% of tigers destroyed by infantry anti-tank weapons. The statistical significance suggested that without acoustic deception methods, American infantry casualties would have been substantially higher during the critical first week of German offensive operations. Modern military analysis of acoustic deception at the Bulge focuses on the innovation's rapid development, implementation, and obsolescence. The entire cycle from initial concept to widespread deployment to enemy countermeasures occurred in under 2 weeks. This compressed timeline demonstrates how tactical innovation operates in high-intensity conflict. Solutions must be developed, tested, and deployed faster than enemies can analyze and counter them. The side that completes this cycle most rapidly gains temporary advantages that can have strategic consequences. The acoustic deception also illustrated how simple methods can succeed when they exploit specific vulnerabilities in enemy training and doctrine. Tiger crews weren't incompetent or cowardly. They were following correct procedures based on legitimate threats they'd faced on the Eastern Front. American forces weaponized those correct procedures by triggering them without creating actual threats. This principle, exploit enemy strengths by making those strengths liabilities, appears repeatedly in asymmetric warfare. The Taliban in Afghanistan used IEDs to exploit American emphasis on force protection, turning defensive measures into vulnerabilities. The Viet Cong in Vietnam exploited American firepower doctrine by operating in close terrain where American advantages were neutralized. In each case, weaker forces achieved disproportionate effects by understanding how stronger enemies thought and operated, then creating conditions where standard responses became disadvantageous. The story of Rangers using trash cans to kill tigers has been largely overlooked in popular histories of World War II because it doesn't fit conventional narratives about technological superiority or heroic last stands. The method was too strange, too improvised, and too temporary to become part of the standard Bulge mythology. But for the soldiers who fought in those desperate December days when German armor seemed unstoppable, acoustic deception represented hope that innovation and intelligence could overcome material disadvantage. Staff Sergeant Jack Miller's insight that sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy wasn't to hide but to make the noise they expected saved lives and bought time when both were in desperately short supply. The trash cans and ammunition crates positioned across frozen Belgian fields weren't sophisticated weapons, but in the hands of soldiers who understood German psychology better than the Germans understood American desperation, they became instruments that helped turn the tide of the last great German offensive in the West. 50 Tigers destroyed or disabled in 1 month by soldiers making noise. It was absurd, improvised, and temporary. It was also exactly what American forces needed when conventional methods were failing and time was running out. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the most powerful. Sometimes it's just the right sound at the right moment, made by soldiers who understood that the enemy's training was both their greatest strength and their most exploitable vulnerability. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.